All right, thanks for listening to Pastor with No Answers. We want to get started here quickly, but we have a music sponsor that we're excited about. Here on Pastor with No Answers, sure, we debate and argue and yell at each other about stupid theological and cultural issues, but we also tell people stories. And here's an example of music, which my brother and I love, as well as a good story. We have Tony Gebbard. He is completely blind, 19 years old, and strives to inspire without a pair of eyes. His new album, Father Forgive Me, can be found anywhere music is sold online. There's limited physical CDs. What the heck are those? They're available through Bandcamp. Go to www.tonygebbard, that's GEBHARD.bandcamp.com to claim your copy. Go like them on Facebook at facebook.com/Tony Gebbard Music. That's TonyGebbard. Check out this sample from the new album, Father Forgive Me.
19 years, broken flesh, mindless feud. I can't imagine any day without you. Run on me, surrounding me, I'm breaking down. I feel so worthless all the time. If heaven was so far away, I'd be with you. Another million years have passed and it feels so cool. Sanctify my broken eyes, I'm falling away. Bless your grace when I lose.
All right. Nice singing, nice screaming, great music. What else can you ask for? That's from the new album, Father Forgive Me. Go to facebook.com/Tony Gebbard Music and go to where they sell digital music, and you can find this. Go pick it up. Thank you, Tony. We'll have this whole song in its entirety at the end of this episode. So if you're not interested in the subject of this episode, you can just skip to that song right now.
This is Joel Osteen.
It's Osteen, but cool. And this is The Masturbator.
And this is Pastor with No Answers.
All right. Well, you know what's crazy is anytime we have Chip Judd on the show, we should change the title of it from Pastor with No Answers to A Pastor with No Answers and One with All the Answers. But we didn't do that, man. I'm sorry.
I like it, though.
I mean, it's probably a little insulting to you for us to call this the Pastor with No Answers, and then we get Pastor Chip on here.
No, I know you're referring to yourself. So I'm good. Now, listen, let me say something before we go any further.
Yeah.
One of the two introductions was wrong, and one of them was right. So let your audience decide who was being themselves.
Well, if you're insinuating that I'm embarrassed about having masturbated in my life, you've got the wrong person.
No, I think the way you introduced yourself, it was current tense, present tense. It wasn't past tense. It was present tense.
Well, what I'm sure a lot of people are wondering is why in the world Joel Osteen and masturbating. So I told Chip we're going to dive right into this. We've got a Q&A session with Chip. A lot of you guys have sent in questions. If you haven't listened to all the PWNA episodes, I would suggest going back to our mental illness episode with Chip. That's kind of when we dove into a lot of that sort of counseling type stuff. Depression.
So is the implication that Joel Osteen is mentally ill?
What's that?
So is the implication that Joel Osteen is mentally ill?
He's got a masturbating mental illness.
Gotcha.
Wow.
Yes.
All right.
No, so I told Chip we're going to dive right into this because I've got some questions about masturbating and Joel Osteen. And he said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes, I'm serious." So that's where our intro was birthed from. So my brother masturbates 8 times a day. Is that a problem?
For his wife, probably.
All right, no, here's the deal is we did a masturbating episode and we talked to about 5 different people, and I was surprised. Outside of the atheist, everybody was pretty conservative. It's Christian perspectives, and everybody was pretty conservative about masturbating. Now, I'm not going to put any words in your mouth, but I have heard you one time, almost in an annoying type way, like say, guys, we are sexual beings. Like, this is something that we deal with. In no way were you like saying we should be masturbating every second or cheating on our wives, but it was in a way of, we're way overthinking this. We are way giving ourselves too hard of a time. So let me just give you a specific question. Let's take the dude who has pursued his wife like crazy, but she is going through a time of depression. It's going on 3 years. You've talked to him before, Chip, and you can tell he is sincerely trying to pursue her in a loving way, but she just has no interest in having sex. Does this guy not ever touch himself?
Probably a good question. I mean, I believe, like you said, like if I were standing in front of a crowd of married couples talking about sexuality, and I would say something like this eventually, that men have literally a physical need to engage sexually. So what does that mean when you're in a marriage and let's say, you've been sexually active with your wife for 5 years and now you're in the situation you just described, 3 years with very, very limited sexuality.
Yeah.
My deal would be, if I were counseling the guy, my deal would be, hey, draw the battle lines on pornography and your thought life, not whether or not you physically relieve yourself through masturbation. Now, why am I comfortable saying that? Am I just like, masturbation is no big deal? Well, I mean, I don't know if I am or not. But what I am saying is the real issue is your thought life and what you feed it and what you feed on within it.
Yeah.
So, let me back up and say my basic premise or my basic focus when I talk about this, and I love to talk to young guys particularly.
You love talking about masturbating.
Well, whatever. I do. But let me tell you why. I really do. Because I want them to be great husbands.
Right.
And here's the deal. When you're 13, 14, 15, 18, 20, 22 and unmarried, what are you practicing for? Woody Allen says life's 90% practice or preparation. What are you preparing for? You're preparing to have a satisfying, exciting sexual relationship with one woman for the rest of your life.
Right.
Well, looking at various images of different women in different whatever settings, masturbating, creating movies inside your head, expectations inside your head that will never happen the way you see them in your head,
right,
is not a great way to practice and prepare for a monogamous, exciting, fulfilling relationship for the rest of your life. So what I told my own son and what I tell people all the time when I get to talk about this is, here's the deal. Don't make the fuss about masturbation.
Right.
Make the fuss about pornography. Because here's the deal. Why do I feel safe saying that? If you don't feed on pornography, your urges are going to be closer to the way God meant for them to be. If you go the way our culture's gone, we're made to be sexual creatures. We're not made to be the over-sexual, addictive, crazy creatures our culture's made us out to be.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What about the committed Christian male who goes off to college swearing that he's not going to look at porn, but ends up in class with a bunch of hot girls? He's doing all the right stuff, man. He's bouncing his eyes, but he still saw some boobs. He's turned on. He gets back to his dorm room. He is horny as anything. Would you say, hey, man, don't look at porn, but just try to rub one out real quick?
I would not fuss with the young guy if that's what he did.
Right.
My statement would be, draw your battle lines with porn, not masturbation.
Gotcha.
Because it's a smarter way to do the battle, to be quite honest with you.
Awesome. Well, it is a lot of hard work to pursue your wife, so I'm going to stop pursuing her, and not look at porn, but just masturbate all the time. Is that what you're saying?
No, please. No.
I'm kidding. I didn't hear you that way. That's I was expecting some of those perspectives on our podcast, having talked to like I said, 6 different people. Now 2 of them were female, so they have a completely different perspective altogether. But yeah, out of like 3 of the males, I was super surprised. All right, second question: Joel Osteen, do you think he's doing a good job with ministry?
I think Joel, to the best of his ability, is fulfilling what he perceives to be the assignment given to him by God. And
do you think that's his assignment? Do you think he's getting it right?
I'm not in that chain of communication, so
right.
I don't know what orders are coming to him from headquarters.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume. I mean, here's the deal. Sometimes we look at ministries and we don't like them, whatever. I don't necessarily. Here's my rule of thumb. When I watch somebody do whatever they're doing, can I picture Jesus doing that? Now, the big complaint some people would have with Joel is, well, but he doesn't go the hard places. He doesn't preach the whole counsel of God kind of thing. But what he does do, can I picture Jesus being as kind as he is, as encouraging as he is, as relentlessly positive as he is? I can kind of picture Jesus being that way. Now, might he say some things Joel doesn't say? Yeah, he might. He would probably. But here's the deal. I don't know if Joel's addressing that in some other way through his ministry at his church. Yeah. So I'm good with Joel. Yeah. I mean, I understand some of the people's issues, but I think we just need to be a little careful about judging and being harsh with a guy who I didn't know. When I say knew, I don't mean I knew him personally, but I knew his father in the movement that I was a part of. And his dad was a prince of a man. Yeah. I mean, a prince of a man. And Joel, I think, is just kind of fulfilling the heritage. And that is, you know what? God is good, and he has great intentions for everybody. And, I think Joel's doing what he feels like he's called to do.
Yeah.
So that's my deal with Joel.
My question, Joey, is, like, I'm kind of out of the loop when it comes to Joel Osteen. So what is your beef with him? Not just as what he speaks from the pulpit, but is there anything you see, like how he's running his ministry or the things he's doing with his ministry, that are red flags to you?
Right. Well, besides not opening up about his masturbating mental illness, here's what I would say is I agree with Chip that I have no problem with him like withholding talking about something, because I don't want to assess for another brother, hey, this is what you should be doing with your ministry. Because I mean, let's talk about the Christian dude that plays music, but he doesn't feel compelled to preach the gospel from on stage. I mean, nobody, a lot of us don't have a problem with that. What I think that if I had to stretch myself to nitpick at somebody, which I don't care to do, I would say it's the sort of lifestyle and life expectations that he seems to set people up for. In other words, life is going to be good if you just put your thoughts in the right place. Things will happen well for you because God is good. And it's like all this positivity, which I'm sure some of it is effective, but it just seems like you're giving people false expectations because life does suck. But I need to make sure that I'm clear with the fact that I don't listen to sermons of Joel Osteen, so I can't speak authoritatively. But I've seen quotes and things that he's said, and it just seems like there's that false expectation set up.
Okay,
kind of like a more reserved, non-in-your-face, name it, claim it.
So prosperity.
Yeah, okay. I think so.
Gotcha. Okay.
Who knows? All right. Well, let's tackle some of these Q and A's. Jared, you want to hit the first one?
So I guess a big question that I have, because I know in the past I've had burden for people that are going through different trials and tribulations in their life. So my question to you, Chip, is how does a Christian counselor maintain distance and not be brought down emotionally and spiritually, especially if that's what you do? Your life's calling is to be a counselor, to be a minister. Mm-hmm. So what do you do spiritually to really create some kind of hedge to where you're not brought down by all these problems surrounding you, hour by hour, day by day?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I'm full of all these dumb little one-liners, but they come out of my moments in my life when God kind of settled something for me. But one is this: I care deeply about everyone I ever have the honor to try to help through life. I care deeply, but I don't carry them or their issues. And what
Okay.
I mean by that is Philippians 2:13 says, "For it is God who's at work. For it is God who's at work in you, both to will and to do of his good pleasure." So when I walk with someone, work with someone, whatever, my background foundational mentality is it's God who's at work. And here's the deal. If God's not at work before they sit down in front of me as a counselor, and he's not at work when they walk out my door, they're in a world of hurt because I'm not their answer. Now, I'm going to do everything I can. God help me. I'm going to do everything I can to be of assistance to them. But I'm not going to take responsibility for healing, fixing, restoring, redeeming. I promise I'm going to do everything I can to help them in the moments I'm with them. But I'm not going to take responsibility for whether their life turns out okay.
Now, line that up with, because I know what your perspective is of the science of counseling. It seems as if you take what you just said and run too fast with it, you would say secular science and that sort of counseling, whatever, they don't have the hope of God. Therefore, there's no use.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say you definitely need to be on your toes, and because. But let's just say,
Chip Judd could give some people some helpful advice, and the Holy Spirit doesn't intervene. But the person's like, "Wow, I've never even thought of it that way." Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's what I was getting ready to say. A totally non-Christian counselor could have tools that would still be helpful in helping someone gain an insight or a perspective that just help them do life a little bit more effectively and fruitfully and flourishing. But for that Christian, they should still have the mentality that God was with me before I met this counselor, God was with me when I met with the counselor, and God's with me after I leave the counselor.
Yeah.
And I love a way of looking at ministry, no matter what we're called to do. I don't know if you've ever heard me say this, Joey, but it's the elephant and the mouse. You ever heard me talk about the elephant?
Yeah.
So for me, years ago, that verse and maybe some others, for it's God who's at work. Just the thought that here's an elephant, big old giant elephant, and a little old mouse on his shoulder. And they're, they travel together. Everywhere they go together. Big old elephant, little mouse on his shoulder, right by his ear. So they come to this little rope thatched, shaky little bridge, and they walk across the bridge. And I mean, it's creaking and groaning, and you feel like it's going to break and whatever. They get to the other side, and the mouse on the elephant's shoulder says, "Boy, we really shook that bridge." And what I mean is, that little story has just kind of created a posture of my heart that it's not me that's shaking the bridge.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it makes perfect sense. And I would even say as a Christian, it makes so much sense. But then my mind goes in the other direction. If you're not a Christian and you're practicing counseling, then what's your safeguard? Like our safeguard, apparently, according to what you're saying, is, God is ultimately in charge. But if you're practicing counseling, from a secular standpoint where there is no God component to it, it sounds like you're screwed. How do you safeguard yourself?
well, I mean, I would say the same thing if the counselor's not a Christian, but the person they're counseling is a Christian.
Yeah.
The God's at work in that person, and I mean, obviously this is a stupid example, but God spoke through a jackass, for crying out loud.
Right.
So God can use a totally disinterested, unspiritual, non-believing counselor to help a person.
Yeah.
And I believe.
No, I believe that.
And I believe
Yeah.
God could even put His words in that unbeliever's mouth.
Right. I mean, especially if we're coming from a standpoint of God created, all things, and we're all, God's the source of everything. So obviously, science in itself is a good thing. Science was created by men, so if used in a good, helpful way, of course it's good. Just like a non-believing fireman that rescued the kid out of the fire did a good job. He didn't do a Christian rescue. He just rescued, but it was still effective.
I think I was probably misunderstood. When I said you're screwed, I meant the practitioner.
Yeah.
No. I heard
Yeah.
you right. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so that's going back to my original question. I mean, to me, this whole burden of reaching out to people and trying to help
Yeah.
them and getting invested in their problems. So I understand totally how the God component kind of gives you a place to breathe. But if you don't have that God component, it seems that's probably especially more difficult if you're a practitioner and you're not a Christian.
Yeah, I don't know if it still holds true, but there was a time when the highest suicide rate among professionals was with psychiatrists.
Wow.
So, I mean, I would agree with you. I think if you're trying to carry the burdens of humanity by yourself, man, you better have some good drugs.
And Chip knows all about that. All right. Now, second question, and I was thinking about trying to translate this for the person, but I think we could all probably use context and we get it, but I'm just going to ask it straight up.
Mm-hmm.
Can a Christian commit suicide as a fast track to heaven? And he said in parentheses, I'm not suicidal.
Thank you. I mean, theologically, do I believe a person can commit suicide and go to heaven? Obviously, a believer, someone who's put their faith in Jesus Christ. My answer to that would be yes. The other side of the coin is, can a person in their right mind take their own life? My answer would be no.
Interesting.
So, where do you land in the middle with that? Anybody who would seriously consider, life's just not really that great. I think I'll just go to heaven quicker. They're clearly, number one, they're not in the right mind. There's something amiss. And number two, there's a whole lot of spiritual reality they don't understand. It's not up to us to decide what tomorrow holds. I don't even think we're supposed to decide what car to buy. We're supposed to pray about everything.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if I don't look at it like somebody in their right mind is contemplating, gee, I'm going to end up dying. Why don't I just kind of go now? I don't think anybody in their right mind would think. No, it's just it's built into every cell of our body to fight to live, to fight for air, to fight for meaning, to fight for purpose. So, if the question's, can a person who commits suicide go to heaven? I believe a person who is going to go to heaven if they hadn't committed suicide, still going to go to heaven if they do commit suicide. But the reason I can say that is my understanding of spirit, soul, and body. It's your spirit that's born again. Your soul still carries the wounds and information, good or bad, from life. And if the soul is beat up enough that life just seems so bad, I want out of here, I think God's still going to receive that person into his loving embrace. Now, the last thing I'd want is for somebody to say, oh, he's saying it's okay if I go kill myself.
Right.
The truth is, people in their right minds don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, life at its worst, again, now I'm not talking about mental illness and whatever, but I'm talking about, bad, life does hurt, but there's still something in us that wants to stay.
I just had the weirdest theory pop in my head, like God...
Gee, that doesn't surprise me a bit.
God definitely interacts with his people, but if we experience God in his absolute fullness in a
Right.
way that we will experience in heaven,
Right.
I think it would be hard if we knew for a fact that we would have a shortcut to heaven. It would be hard not to kill yourself, because you'd be like, well, that loving Father that I interacted with perfectly, he'll wipe the shame away, he'll wipe the guilt. I mean, there's just nothing but good enveloped in him. So if I could just be back in that thing, back in that place, then everything would be okay. Especially, think about it, especially someone without a family that just kind of feels like they don't have a whole lot of purpose, and if they could just get back. So all that to say is, I wonder if that's one reason why God doesn't make himself even more known to people. But.
Well, I would probably pick a little bit there, split hairs, whatever. I believe we put too much off to the sweet by and by. I believe we have barely scratched the surface of what God wants us to experience in this lifetime. But here's my deal, Joey. I believe we can experience God way beyond what we have, but in the experiencing of Him, become more like Him. So here's my thought process. I'm going to die someday. I'm going to live much longer in that reality than I am this one. Who cares how good it is? Best I can tell from Scripture, it's only in this reality I can really do anything meaningful for God, to express my gratefulness, to express my whatever. So I'm not in any hurry to go.
Right.
Now, I've had a day or two here and there where I'm like, you know what, Jesus, it wouldn't be bad if you wanted to pull the plug right now. But your head clears and you're like, no, I don't want that. Again, let me just restate. I believe, even the way you said it, I believe God means for us. Jesus died to bring us to a place of receptivity to way more than we're currently experiencing. And I don't think the experiencing of it is going to make us in a hurry to leave. I think just the opposite. It's going to create a burden in us. Oh, my God, I want to help more and more people get this.
Yeah, and maybe that makes sense, and maybe even like more sense of peace. Like, that's what's awaiting me, man.
Right.
I'll live here on this earth for another 1,000 years if that's what I.
Yeah.
And just the pain and the trials and tribulations of this present life will make heaven that much sweeter. So I think it does prepare us, as we experience life.
I mean, I love a scripture like this. He prepares a table for us. Where? In the presence of our enemies.
Yeah.
That's sweet to me.
Yeah.
The devil is you guys are comfortable cussing. I'm not. But if I was, I'd throw every word I had in there. The devil is the meanest.
It'll feel so good, Chip. Just do it.
He's the meanest, most cowardly turd that ever, whatever. He's whatever. But so if I can do anything that rubs his nose in a pile of what, so then I look at that verse and it says, God prepares a table for you in the presence. It's almost like, imagine yourself sitting down to a feast of God's goodness and the devil's watching you eat.
Yeah. Is it okay to hate Satan?
Oh, please.
Is it okay to want him tortured?
Yeah.
What if God said, Chip, Satan can have a chance at repenting, but you get to make the decision?
Oh, wow. Wow.
All right, so
I'd probably say let him have a shot at it.
I would too. I would too.
I mean, gosh, God's been so good to me. Man.
All right, I love this question. Am I not following God's will by being on an antidepressant? For example, he made me depressed for a reason, obviously. Am I chemically covering it up? So in other words, this person sees how he is as something that God made with purpose. If you're, participating in antidepressants, you're covering up God's masterpiece, I reckon.
Yeah. I mean, whatever, Joey, but I'll take a little bit more time because everybody doesn't know. I'm not real big on the whole God's in control.
Yeah.
For instance, a verse like, God works all things together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. It doesn't say all things are good.
Right.
It just says he works all things together for good. In other words, I don't believe God's surprised by anything. I don't think the devil can ever do anything that God's like, gee, I don't know what to do with that. But on the other hand, it doesn't comfort me and never has comforted me to believe nothing happens that God didn't want to happen. Say that to somebody who experienced abuse, who whatever. I mean, there's so many situations. It's like, really, that comforts you to think that thought?
Yeah. So
back to the person who's dealing with depression and on medication. My deal is, Jesus said, I've come to bring you life and that life more abundantly. If while we're figuring things out, trying to decide why am I this way? Is it physiological? Is it emotional? Is it just the pain and trauma of my past wounds? If medication helps me function better and enjoy this wonderful thing called life, I'm totally on board with that, and quite honestly, I've taken antidepressants myself when I came through my little crash and burn two or so years ago, whatever it was, and here's what drives me crazy. Somebody will say, well, I just believe God's in control. We could submit to whatever He whatever happens in our life, it was God's will, and we should roll with it. I'm like, oh, okay. Do you ever take aspirin?
Right.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute. If you got a headache, it must be God's will for you to have a headache. How dare you take aspirin to get rid of it?
Right.
Now, I know I'm being ridiculous, but I don't think I am being ridiculous. You've got cancer, sir? Yeah. And you believe God allowed you to have cancer? Oh, okay. But you're gonna go to this doctor, that doctor. You're gonna go up to Duke. You're gonna go halfway across the country to get rid of this thing that God wanted you to have.
Yeah.
I just don't. Now, my point is, I'm totally on board with you. Do everything and anything you can do to get rid of the cancer. But why do we have to start with the premise that this request came across God's desk? I want Joe Blow here to experience cancer, fight it for 3 years, and oops, he's not going to make it. And God looks at that and says, I think that'll be good for him. That doesn't make me like God more.
But isn't his permissible will just as quote unquote bad as his overt will? So in other words, if God is able to meticulously have his hands in all the details, then he is able to answer that prayer. You would at least have to say, okay, there's some greater purpose and good that we can't see. That's the reason why God is not healing this person.
All right, I was with you till the last phrase or two. Is there a greater purpose? Yes, but where I land is Romans 8, all things work together for good. Not God sees some greater purpose in the cancer. God's going to take a bad thing that, and this is what creeps people out, that maybe is not the best he hoped for. Again, here's the deal. All the way back to chapter 1. God, let's create man and woman in our image and likeness, and let's give them the responsibility, authority, and power to rule, steward, manage this planet.
Yeah.
God, I believe we don't get that yet. That God is God, and he's absolutely sovereign. Please hear that. He's absolutely sovereign. But he leased us an apartment, and he said, go live in that apartment, keep it clean, take care of it, paint it cool colors. But somewhere down the road, I'm going to come back and see how you've taken care of it. And in the meantime, if you need my help, I would love to help. I would love to come have coffee with you and help you. In other words, God wants to be engaged in his creation with us. So when I say God's not in control, people get freaked out. And I'm learning more and more as I talk to people. With some people, it's semantics.
Yeah.
I believe God's absolutely sovereign, but I believe he meant in his sovereignty, he meant it when he said, I'm giving temporary managing power over the earth to my children. I'm going to help you any which way you ask. But if you don't ask me to help, you're kind of on your own. So
I know we don't want to stay here too long,
right.
but with that last example you gave, I mean, I'm sure there have been many fathers pray for their girls' safety when they start driving for the first time, or they
right.
go off to the college for the first time,
right.
and their daughter was raped or died in a car wreck.
Right.
I mean, so that doesn't sound like a God that says, hey, just ask me, I will help. It sounds like a God who's saying, you know what? This earth is fallen. There's a lot of stuff bad going on. Just know that in the end, it's all going to be okay. I love you, sort of thing. I mean, it doesn't sound like...
I like that better than God picked for my daughter to die.
Right.
I'd rather what you just said than we wrestle ourselves around to this catch-all, well, God's in control, and everything happens for a reason.
Right.
I mean, I'm like, God, help us, man. Talk about the cheesiest, laziest theology there is. That's it right there.
Yeah.
Now, so what is the answer? I mean, I'm not saying I've got it all figured out, but I'm not good with that. So what am I good with? Well, does the church pray the way it should pray? I don't know anybody that would say yes. Next question, does prayer make a difference? Yes. Okay, time out. Does the church pray like it should? No. Does prayer make a difference? Yes. But somehow we still come out with God always gets what he wants. And I don't understand how that works. So now, Dad prayed for his daughter. Here's the deal. We're Western cultured American Christians. We think individualistically. I prayed for my daughter. Does that mean that the war in the heavenlies was won by my one little prayer? Let's just say in Charleston, how many people here? 1 million?
Something like that.
Let's say there's 1 million.
500,000.
Let's say there's somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people in the greater Charleston area. Let's say 25,000 of that 500,000 are praying with some degree of effectiveness and fervency.
Yeah.
I think that's probably being kind. But let's say that they are. If that was an election, clearly we lost.
Right.
So I'm going to pray for my daughter. But is that enough to win the war in the heavenlies? Ephesians 6 says we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers in heavenly places. We're not praying like we should. We all agree. Prayer makes a difference, yes. But we're still somehow winning the war?
Right.
That just doesn't. Now, my point is this. What if we just doubled the number of Christians that we're praying?
Right.
I personally believe the reality we experience would be different.
Wow.
Perfect?
That's interesting.
Perfect? I don't know.
Right.
But it'd be different.
Right. Jared, here's a yes or no question for you. Do you think there would be some constructive dialogue between Chip and Godless?
No, not at all. Nope.
It would turn into Godless yelling at how stupid Chip is, and Chip just being like, yeah, I can't talk to this guy.
Bring it, man.
No offense, Godless, but you would call Chip stupid, and that's okay, man. I love you.
I don't mind a bit, man.
He basically called us stupid, so yeah.
We'll have him back on for sure. That'd be fun.
I would love to talk to Godless.
Yeah.
All I'd like to ask him is, my test of good theology is how does it live? Mine's living pretty good.
Right.
And I don't mean because I got stuff. I mean, in my heart of hearts, in the core of my being, I feel at peace with what I believe about reality.
Yeah. How do you tell the difference, Chip, between a mental illness that must be medicated and a spiritual affliction that only prayer and God can remove? And let me rephrase this because we've already touched on this a little bit, but is there ever a time when it is clear to you, hey, you don't need medication. You need to stop doing such and such, or you need to ask forgiveness for such and such, or change this or change that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah. I would say.
Do you think it's ever very unclear?
I would say probably if most is 51%, I would say most of the time you should approach it as if it's unclear.
Yeah.
In other words, I believe that you're honoring the complexity of the human creation by never assuming simple, clear, quick answers are the right ones. So my point being, it's probably pretty easy. I'm oversimplifying here, but it's probably fairly easy to determine when medication would probably be at least a good thing to try.
Yeah.
Then beyond that, like you said, is it this or that? The truth of the matter is there's always stuff the person needs to stop doing, start doing, because, there's an element in there where you got to say this, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Right.
I made poor life decisions and therefore I'm depressed, or I was depressed and therefore I made poor life decisions. There's a point in that where you just say, it doesn't matter which is the chicken and which is the egg. The trick is depression after a certain point is physiological. Is it also tools and mental practices that could be improved on? Of course. So it's always both and, not either or, if that makes sense. Now, I say always. I'm not saying everybody should be on medication. That's not what I mean. But there's always an element of things that should be stopped and started even if it's also a medicatable physiological issue. There's still things you can do better. Let me say something about the whole, like taking the spiritual to the point of, is it spiritual oppression, maybe even demonic? I mean, one of my favorite scriptures to talk about is Matthew 12:43-45, where Jesus is telling the story, and he says, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, it goes into dry places seeking rest and finds none. Then it comes back to the guy with 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. And they come in and enter there, and blah blah blah. And the last state of the man's worse than the first. Here's the deal: talking about a spirit leaving a house and then coming back to the house, finding it empty, swept, and put in order. Here's what and again, I don't have time to teach on the whole thing, but here's the deal. Let's say there is a spiritual issue. So you cast the devil out of a person, and I have done that. I believe in that. But I believe it's much less needed in the context most of us are in. But even if you do, if that person doesn't renovate the house, what's the house? Their thoughts, their beliefs, their feelings, their life management skills. If they don't renovate the house, they're going to end up worse than they started.
Yeah.
Because somehow their life was compatible with the presence of that spirit. And if you don't change the compatibility issues, he's coming back.
Yeah.
So either way, you still need to deal with what we would put under the category of counseling and, whatever. Does that make sense?
So definitely more of a holistic approach. I mean, you're
Yes,
saying that the
absolutely.
body, soul, and spirit are so closely intertwined that you can't just focus on one component.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
So, Chip, practically speaking, what are some points of commonality between Christian and secular counseling? I mean, obviously, we know the worldviews are probably going to be different, but in terms of the actual practice of counseling, what are some points of commonality, and then what are some key differences in practice?
Yeah, when I first started to move toward going back to school to get my master's, I was in a highly spiritual, charismatic kind of environment, and most of the people I ran with were not very encouraging of my going back for education. And in the process, I sat in my classes, and I would sit there, and cognitive therapy comes to mind, family systems stuff comes to mind. And I would sit there, and I'd say, this is biblical stuff, but with no credit or reference to the Bible. But it was solidly great stuff. And so here's what I say now when I'm running my mouth about this stuff to people. I say, here's the deal with secular psychology. Secular psychology starts wrong because they don't believe in the fallenness of man, the depravity of man, the separation, spiritual death, all that cool stuff. And then it ends wrong because they don't believe we need a savior. They believe we can kind of figure it out on our own. So what I say is secular psychology starts wrong and it ends wrong. But in between the two, they got some really cool stuff. And I tell people sometimes that if you want to understand how to listen to me, I am solidly rooted and grounded in biblical reality and spirit-led theology and practice mixed with what I call sanctified psychology. And all I mean by that is taking the cool stuff that psychology's dug out, and I call it passing it through the cross, and bringing out in a form that is in language and rooted in good, solid theological perspective of the fallenness of man, need for redemption, and our inability to live the life we want on our own. And point being, to go back to your question, I believe there are secular counselors you could go to who could be helpful, but not if the questions are around your worldview, your version of reality. Do you need help beyond yourself? Obviously, if they're going to question and challenge that, they're not going to be very helpful to you.
And even if they don't question it, Jared, just do not have a beer with that asshole. You just get your counseling and you go on your way.
Okay.
All right. Can you smoke weed, edibles to enhance worship? Do you think it's possible that someone can worship at a deeper level under the influence of drugs? And I guess the second question would be, should someone, let's just say someone smokes weed and they're like, man, I feel more focused, I feel more productive, I feel more appreciative. Why wouldn't I worship the Lord high?
Wow. Are you high right now, Joey?
I'm not, but you have a very interesting perspective because I'm not asking someone who's never been high before. You have a drug history, so
right.
I think you can resonate with this question.
I spent 5 years doing recreational drugs. 2 of those, the last 2 of the 5, every single day, I did drugs of some kind. Here's the thing. Again, this is my cheesy answer. My rule of thumb: can I picture Jesus doing it? Can I picture Jesus passing a joint with the disciples? I'm sorry, I can't. I just, Jesus leaning over to Peter. Wow, this is some good stuff, man. Where'd you get this? I mean, whatever.
Yeah, but could you?
It doesn't work for me.
This
man.
is the only thing that I like to respond to that philosophy is: could you imagine Jesus dunking over LeBron James?
No, because I don't think that was a physical attribute that he had. I mean,
but that doesn't make it wrong.
Joey, have you ever seen the Israeli basketball team? Exactly.
Yeah, but that's not. There's no right or wrongness to that.
Right.
I mean, here's the thing: drugs create an artificially induced state of mental experience, whether it's calmness, whether it's agitation, whether it's speed to go up, quaaludes to go down. You're manipulating your physiological brain. In other words, you're not changing your spiritual awareness. You're changing the filters through which you interpret your spiritual awareness. Because all a drug affects is your physical organ of experience and knowledge called a brain. You're changing your receptors to reality. And personally, I think you're tuning to channels, you might say, that are more likely to have be populated by presences that aren't the one you're really looking for. Did that make sense?
It does, but with if you take exactly what you said about changing the chemicals and the lenses,
right.
That's antidepressants too.
Yeah, but antidepressants don't create an altered perception of reality. They don't create I don't know a good example, Joey. You put on a pair of glasses that magnify things, and I'm stretching here, but it alters your perception of reality. Makes things up close look bigger.
It's distorted.
Yeah, it distorts reality. So drugs create a false sense of peace when nothing in your life has changed. I don't mean outside of you, but even inside of you. You manipulate the brain. In a sense, now, I would say the same thing about psychotropic drugs, like depression drugs. You're removing depression without really changing anything about that person's life. That, if done alone without therapy, I would be as against that as I would be smoking pot to go to church.
Yeah.
So drugs are changing the way you engage reality, but without really changing anything. So it's a false sense of progress, if you will. It's a false sense of, wow, I just really feel God. Well, if you've got to smoke a joint to feel God, there's something wrong with the way you're going after God.
Yeah.
And Joey, I would just add to that too. There are a lot of people in the New Age community, and they actually endorse the use of psychedelic drugs to actually open portals and to actually, communicate with entities.
Right.
So I think that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
Interesting. Good stuff.
And I'll be honest, before I was a Christian, I would smoke pot and read the Bible. But I don't know that I engaged God. I engaged something, but I don't know that I engaged God.
Yeah, but I would say it wouldn't be totally out of God's character to still speak to you.
Yeah, he definitely was as C.S. Lewis called him. He was definitely the relentless hound of heaven.
Yeah.
I'm oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that he got me.
All right, one more question. And this is coming from someone who I know personally. His wife has been struggling with postpartum for 6 years. And most of the time when he makes a recommendation on trying something different to help, she gets defensive and says, I don't know that hey, you don't know what my depression feels like, so how can you know to fix it? She always talks about wanting to move, either whether it's just a different house or to a different city. She went back to work 3 days a week starting this past January. She's trying to stay in community groups and all that sort of thing, but it's just a crazy situation. And let me emphasize, 6 years. And she has investigated medication. She has looked into counseling. I mean, what do you tell a couple like this if they're sitting in front of you and you hear 6 years and it sounds like they have been active with seeking solutions?
Well, when you say she's looked into medication and counseling, do you mean gone to counseling and taken medication?
She goes to a psychiatrist every several months, but it's to talk about medication and not long enough to talk through problems and work through. So that may be it right there.
But is she on medication?
Yes.
I mean, again, I'm not a doctor, so please, anybody, please make sure you hear this carefully because I might be full of hot air. But to me, if somebody's 6 years after having a baby, which is what postpartum means, post-delivery of a child, 6 years later, it's not postpartum.
Right.
I mean, maybe it was spiked or initiated or started during the period post-delivery of that child, but it's way beyond that.
Yeah.
In other words, this is not postpartum depression anymore. So then you look at it as, it's depression,
right?
And you go at it from that direction, and typically medication would be, especially 6 years. I believe there are depressions that are tricky to treat. If this person's not engaging anyone in what we would call talk therapy,
right,
I would consider that significant. Sometimes people, we have different ways we fight. We throw around the phrase passive aggressive, very inappropriately, I think. But the point is, if I can't out-talk you, if I can't out-position you, in other words, you're in a position in my life where I kind of have to, yield in some manner, shape, or form.
Right.
I may still fight your control over me in other indirect ways.
Right.
And I believe sometimes resistance to get healthy is one of those ways that we fight someone. I'm not saying automatically that this person's fighting their husband or whatever, but if I'm not doing everything under the sun to get healed and well, there's a reason.
Yeah.
And
at what point, how does a husband, and obviously it could be a wife in this situation as well, how does a spouse calibrate tough love and kind of moving on and forging ahead with also not overlooking and not being callous towards their spouse?
Right.
So in other words, what if this husband is just like, you know what, and I'm just making up scenarios here, you don't want to be a part of a community group, you don't want to go to church, you don't want to talk to anybody, I can't have that lifestyle. I'm going to church, I'm going to be in community group, I'm going to move on. I mean, he wouldn't say move on with my life, but how do you figure that tough love thing with also caring?
Well, if the only real mental health professional she's engaging is this psychiatrist, if I were the husband, I would say, I would like to go with you to your appointment. And then two things. One, she may say, no, you're not coming. Two, she may say, okay, great. And then what I would do if I were him is I'd talk to him and say, what is going on with my wife? And
right.
If the doctor says, she has a bona fide mental health situation, illness, whatever, challenge, and then, okay, doctor, what's the full array of things that could be helpful? Well, medication, medication only? Well, no. It'd be great if she were more actively engaged with people. It'd be great if she were talking to a counselor. Oh, well, she doesn't want to do that. Well, I mean, now the doctor may say, well, that's her choice, whatever.
Right.
Now, I worked with, and this has happened before, but I'm just remembering one particular one. Worked with a husband whose wife was dealing with some mental health challenges, and he came to me. And the bottom line is, when certain things were in motion, think life was better when they weren't, and it had to do with medication and some other things. So their situation was dire enough, please hear that I said, go to your wife and say, you can continue to live life the way you are. You can do that. It's your right and prerogative to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to live with you at the same address if you do. I'm going to remain your husband. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of, but I'm not going to live in the same house. Why? Because you're allowing life to just slip away from us, drain away from us. And I believe, I don't care if we can only improve life 10%. I want to do anything we can to get that 10%.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do that, then you're going to have to go, I'm going to be I'm not, in other words, I've never used the D word, divorce, but what I would say is, I'm going to move toward a healthier way to embrace this gift of life. I totally am on board understanding the challenges you deal with, but I'm not okay that you're not availing yourself of every possible thing that could help us. And if you're okay with that, I'm not.
Yeah.
So in a sense, then, if you don't do that, you're kind of enabling the situation. You're enabling her to continue.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yes.
That's good stuff.
Now that's hardcore, but I mean,
my wife keeps losing the remote control.
Put the foot down, man.
I'm not standing for this. That's how she wants to do her life.
I would tell her, there's some new apartments down the road. You could get you a 1-bedroom. I'll help you move in. The kids are staying with me, by the way, because they like to watch TV too. So, I'll move you in.
Oh, goodness. Jared, anything
now, Joey,
else?
I know you're not that stupid a man. 'Cause Priscilla, second to Jesus, and I mean a really close second. She's the best thing ever happened to you. And, dude, if you don't know that, I'll slap you right here.
Yeah, that and having a big brother like Jared. How are you going to insult him on our podcast like this, man?
How did I insult him?
I mean, you said
completely left me out of the equation.
Close second. I mean,
Yeah.
Oh, I totally mean that. Forget it, Jared. You're not even in the screen.
Broken flesh, mindless feud. I can't imagine any day without you. Enemies surrounding me, I'm breaking down. I feel so worthless all the time. Whoa. If heaven was so far away, I'd be with you. Another or he will love one and hate the other. Medicating this addiction, there is no substance in sin. Unsure for